listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you, and welcome to The Briefing. A pop star on her knees, an actress's bathwater for sale, and an OnlyFans creator wanting to feature in a petting zoo. These are all part of a chaotic conversation surrounding feminism right now.
So this conversation is also occurring in an era with the Tradwife movement emerging, with lots of women feeling set back hundreds of years. So you can understand why it is particularly awful to see women monetising conservatism and the sexualisation and objectification of women on the whole.
So is it all empowering satire or a step backwards for feminism? That chat is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Monday the 16th of June.
Hey Tara, and to you listening. Starting in Canada today, where Anthony Albanese will be holding formal talks with the country's leader, Mark Carney, ahead of his first ever face-to-face meeting with Donald Trump tomorrow. He's there for the G7 summit, as are a bunch of other world leaders, but he stopped in Seattle yesterday to announce a $20 billion deal with Amazon. It'll see major data centres built in Sydney and Melbourne, plus solar farms in Victoria and Queensland, all to help power Australia's future in AI over the next 5 years.
As to tomorrow's meeting with the US President, here is what the PM says will be on the agenda.
Obviously, we'll raise tariffs, we'll raise the importance as well of AUKUS, and we will have a discussion as two friends should.
This year's Group of Seven meeting is also expected to focus heavily on Israel and Iran as fatal strikes between the two enter its third day and show no signs of de-escalation. While Australia has joined the international community in calling for calm from both sides, the UK has sent fighter jets to the region while US forces are bolstering Israel's defence. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has directly addressed the people of Iran, calling on them to overthrow the Islamic Republic's regime.
The time has come for you to unite around your flag and your historic legacy by standing up for your freedom from an evil and oppressive regime. It has never been weaker. This is your opportunity to stand up and let your voices be heard.
Despite the escalations, Trump has overnight expressed optimism that they will soon have peace and that he will be the one to broker it, which a lot of analysts are calling out this morning as a fallacy and as a fiction, given that the US were in the middle of talks with Iran regarding their nuclear weapons. They were scheduled for a sixth meeting when Israel struck, so a lot of people really don't think that the US have any sway in this conflict.
Staying overseas in the US, where a manhunt for the suspect behind a political assassination in Minnesota has extended into a second state. Vance Luther Bolters allegedly had a list of 70 targets on his list before he shot a state representative and her husband to death in their home on Saturday local time. A second politician, a senator and his wife were also injured after being shot multiple times. Now, both of the lawmakers were members of the state's Democratic Farmer Labor Party, which is linked to the National Democratic Party.
Authorities say they've located Bolter's manifesto, a list with dozens of names of Democratic politicians on it who supported abortion rights and abortion providers, as well as a bunch of flyers for No Kings demonstrations against President Donald Trump. The rallies protesting Trump and what they say is a politicisation of the US's armed forces were held across the country over the weekend, including one at state capitol, which news outlets say drew tens of thousands of people.
When the revolution occurs and all these fascists, all the Trump supporters, they will be held accountable.
The protests were held while a large military parade in Washington, D.C. took place, celebrating the 250th anniversary of the US Army, coinciding with President Trump's 79th birthday. Now, some initial costs have come out around this military parade, and it's looking like it was around $70 million. I don't know about you, Tara, but looking at my feed and seeing this, they were odd scenes for America. This is something that we expect to see in North Korea. We expect to see it in Russia. It is not something that we expect to see coming out of the US.
Indonesian police have bolstered patrols as their search continues for the gunman who killed an Australian man and injured another in a villa over the weekend. On Saturday, 32-year-old Zvan Radmanovic was killed while celebrating his wife's birthday about an hour north of Kuta. A second man, Sanar Ghanim, was shot and bashed and is now being guarded by police in hospital.
Australian police say the 34-year-old has a child with Roberta Williams' daughter, the stepdaughter of late gangland figure Carl Williams. According to authorities, the two alleged shooters had strong Australian accents and fled on scooters, and local police are aware they'll likely attempt to leave Bali. Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs says it's providing consular assistance to the families and sends its condolences to them.
Back home now, where almost 1 million Australians are delaying or skipping specialist appointments due to cost. A new report by the Grattan Institute has found specialist fees have soared 73% in the last 15 years, with 1 in 10 patients now forking out almost $600 a year.
Psychiatry, endocrinology, cardiology and paediatrics are among the most expensive on first visit, with some specialists charging more than 3 times the Medicare rate. The Institute is calling on the federal government to withdraw Medicare funding from specialists who charge excessive fees and publicly name them, a move it says could save taxpayers up to $170 million a year.
Yeah, and with the public system currently covering just a third of specialist care, the think tank is also requesting more funding to train specialists and try and improve services, especially in rural areas.
Yeah, and they're also saying that this adds, the way that it's currently structured is that it adds a lot of pressure on the country's hospital system. I mean, I've been one of those people that have ended up in emergency with things that I flagged with my GP and was waiting to get to a specialist for, but that appointment was just looking like it was months away. So I ended up doing what a lot of Australians do. You wound up in emergency, you get this thing interrogated and investigated nice and early. It's not ideal, but it was the only way that I could get to the bottom of my thing nice and early. So, I mean, sad to hear that I'm not alone, but good to hear that there's some steps and tangible steps that we can be taking here.
And Australia's very first talking post boxes have arrived, being rolled out in parts of the country in a bid to combat loneliness.
Make a connection and make a difference. You can make a difference with a connection.
Oh, the robot-esque voices is coming from a trusty old red Australia postbox, encouraging Aussies to connect with people the old-fashioned way by sending them a letter in the mail and hearing affirmations from a robot. Darren Cassidy, wow. The partnership between AusPost and Beyond Blues being rolled out in Canberra, Sydney and regional Victoria.
I'm sorry, but this feels like an all-too-real, freaky episode of Black Mirror, don't you think? Technology causes the loneliness and now we're bringing in the talking tech to combat loneliness. Like, what is going on?
I know. Look, I will hop to their defense here. This is a tech that's been kind of trialled in nursing homes across the globe. So there was a really famous case of these robot penguins that nursing homes were bringing in parts of the UK because a lot of old people are actually lonely, like their family don't go and visit them. So they have a little companion in their trusty little penguin.
I know, but that's so sad. I'm like, can we hire people instead of robots to go and visit them? Like, oh my gosh.
Oh, legit. Yeah, fair point about some genuine investment that could be made in the space here. Look, I'm on board with this. I mean, it is a little bit weird, but I am on board with it. And I'm just hoping next time I go to post a letter, which honestly, when was the last time you posted a letter? But I'm hoping I hear something like this.
Go, Kylie, go.
If I could get Kris Jenner coming out of my AusPost box, Tara Cassidy, I am sold and I'm locked in on this.
Pen pal me up.
I love it. That is it for our headlines today. Next up is Helen Smith's deep dive, looking into the latest celebrity stunts that have stirred a whole new conversation around feminism in 2025. Is it all about satire or is it regressive to the movement? Stick around, that deep dive's coming up for you next.
Sabrina Carpenter's new album cover, Sydney Sweeney's bathwater soap, Bonnie Blue's glass box petting zoo stunt, and a Year 9 debating topic on Tradwives have all sparked a conversation on what feminism looks like in 2025. The cover of Carpenter's upcoming album, Man's Best Friend, shows the singer kneeling in front of an unknown man in a suit getting her hair pulled. Hollywood actress Sydney Sweeney has released a soap, Bathwater Bliss, made with her actual bathwater that's being resold on the internet for thousands of dollars. OnlyFans creator Bonnie Blue announced plans for a 24-hour petting zoo where she would be naked, tied up in a glass box, and allow participants to do whatever they wanted to her. South Australia's Year 9 debating competition was given the topic, "The Tradwife Movement is Good for Women." So what do all of these events say about feminism? Is it all just satire? And who's controlling the narrative? Hannah Ferguson is the CEO of Cheek Media. Hannah, let's start with Sabrina Carpenter's album cover. What was your first reaction?
I think my first reaction was just, it was jarring. I think I looked at it and thought, oh no, this is regression. But then my second was automatically to think, basic media literacy here, let's comprehend what this is trying to communicate. If we really think about Sabrina Carpenter's career to date, she is someone that actively centres more of the female gaze. Yes, she's a hot, young, white woman, so we can't take away from the fact that men do love her. But ultimately, the songs that she sings, the way that she writes, is about decentering men. It is for women. She is having that Taylor Swift effect in many ways. And I think that this album cover and the subsequent album title, which is Man's Best Friend, and the kind of imagery of her being placed as a pet, as a bitch, as submissive, is supposed to be a satirical comment on how men treat women. So while my first thought was, this is way too much and it's sending the wrong message, are we losing basic media literacy? And does it kind of bring into question who's allowed to engage in satirical conversation too?
Yeah, because people are doing exactly that. They're either slamming it, but her fans in particular, like you said, they're defending it and calling it satire. How can you draw the line or differentiate? Like, how do you make that clear that this is satire if that's what she's doing?
I think also it's the difference between kind of having that jarred reaction that I did and policing someone, in the sense that I can sit and say, I wouldn't engage in that kind of self-sexualization even for satire. I wouldn't make the same choices, but I can still respect the creative vision and the sophistication that's come with the message. I see a lot of comment sections that attack Sabrina and say things like, reclaiming subjugation isn't feminist. This idea that like reclaiming being submissive doesn't actually mean feminism or progress for women, which I agree with. But that's not what she's trying to do. Sabrina Carpenter isn't saying we're sort of being progressive and sex positive by reclaiming women being submissive in relationships that are heterosexual. She's actually making a comment that's supposed to be seen through and saying this is the old way of doing things that I don't agree with. I think we might be actually going too early on this one. What I want to see is what the actual album entails, what the messaging of the songs is. Her first song, her first track, her first single is called Man-Child. And I think that the video speaks to the contrasting nature between the image and the satire she's putting out and what the actual message of the album will be. So almost it's a question of, in a way, are we infantilizing and putting women down by saying they can't understand this and that it is dangerous? But I also personally did see it at first and go, I wouldn't do that. I am disappointed, and I think it will be damaging for many young women too.
All right, we'll talk about a bit more of that satire a little bit later, but I want to move to now Sydney Sweeney. She has also been pulled into this conversation online. In the past, she's actually hit out against comments sexualising her body, but now she's selling bathwater soap with her own bathwater in it, with critics saying online that it's setting feminism back 100 years and all of those kind of things. Is that fair to put on her?
I think she is commercialising her sexualisation, and I think in a way she's hitting back at the fact that she's inherently going to be sexualised by men and women, that a lot of women attack her because she does meet all of these beauty standards and in many ways drives and sets those standards. I don't think what she's done in any way is feminist. I think it is setting us back. She is literally commercialising her bathwater. She's literally selling to the worst parts of the internet something that is inherently gross, and it does feel icky. But I also understand the kind of questioning and messaging of, if I'm going to be talked about this way anyway, why not make some cash? I think that's an individual choice rather than making a decision that affects the collective movement of women who are saying no to this kind of behaviour from men. So I do think on the whole it's bad. I would never do it. I don't condone it. But I also understand the thinking, and it has created an interesting conversation. I think one of the worst parts of all of this is that she's worked with a male-owned company that makes products for men, so it feels particularly gross in that way. I think also when it comes to both Sydney Sweeney and Sabrina Carpenter, part of the disappointment and part of the backlash is because we're existing in particularly conservative times right now with Donald Trump as president. So this conversation is also occurring in an era with the Tradwife movement emerging, with lots of women feeling set back hundreds of years. So you can understand why it is particularly awful to see women monetizing conservatism and the sexualization and objectification of women on the whole.
Yeah, and with that Tradwife movement that you just mentioned there, just last week, Year 9 students in South Australia were asked to debate in a state comp whether the Tradwife movement is good for women. Some have argued that this is the appropriate space to do that. Why do you think there was such a big reaction to this?
I think because the inherent nature of the Tradwife movement is submission to a man in a marriage. And it's not just about being a stay-at-home parent. It's fundamentally about giving up certain aspects of your voice, giving up certain aspects of your life in order to achieve one purpose, which is reproduction, caretaking of the household, and submission to your husband. And I think that we can talk about, and I've been moved by my own comment section on a post I made about this very issue, where lots of people said, we should be putting this to kids. We should be fostering independent critical thinking. And I agree, this is a zeitgeist topic. It's going to get people talking. It's controversial, yes, but that's what debating topics should be. So I think my opinion has shifted, and I thank all the people who commented on my post about that for that sort of challenge. But I also still believe that it is really tough when there is such an emerging conversation about the manosphere, about the influence of men like Andrew Tate on the minds of young boys, and asking young girls and boys to debate that in a forum. It's dangerous because it might purport and perpetuate the kind of thinking that we see in the manosphere, but at the same time, I think it allows them to go away from their phones and actually ask questions and think differently about what it means. So I see both sides.
It is interesting, though, with the time that we're in with the manosphere and Trump in particular, what's going on in America. But when we talk about Tradwives and stars like Sydney Sweeney and Sabrina Carpenter, do you think that these women are in control of the narrative, or they're just being pulled into one?
I think it would be reducing their agency to say they're being pulled into a narrative. I think both of them know the response that will occur to these images and advertisements and products. I think that actually it's clever marketing and it's starting conversations. I think that we should say to them, you know exactly what you're doing and you're starting interesting, inflammatory conversations. And I think what's ultimately the conversation to me is we're still attacking the women inviting in new discussion than the men who are actually oppressing women in the first place. But I do see them as representations and symbols of a lot of white femininity and privilege and power. And so the way they wield that does matter, and it has the influence and ability to mould the minds of a lot of young women globally. So I think we should give them the agency in their decision-making and marketing power. And I think there is an interesting conversation around feminism to be had here.
As you said, they are marketing and they're playing into this sex sells. But coming back to the satire point, satire only works when it clearly exposes, exaggerates, or critiques whatever it's pointing at. Do you think that these examples of Sabrina's album or Sydney Sweeney's bathwater, do you think that these fit that definition?
If the intent is to actually make an interesting comment and subvert a dominant narrative that's historically existed, really, is it up to them then to be accountable and responsible for every way that this is interpreted and if it's taken in bad faith? Because I'm not sure that they should be. I think when I looked at it, I thought this is damaging and this is harmful to the narrative. So I am critical of both of them for making these choices. But I also understand that if they're making high-level commentary about the way men treat women, is it then their fault if women choose to actually opt into that behaviour too? I don't think so.
On that though, it could be seen as too high level or too highbrow for, I don't know, the regular Joe in Trump's America or even here in Australia, for people to see through that nuance. Are we really at a point where we can get past that?
What's hard about that exact question is that we would never ask it of men.
No.
Men who engage in satirical conversation and try to subvert dominant narratives are not faced with this kind of backlash. It's instead an interesting think piece. At the same time, I can acknowledge that we hold women, as a woman, to a higher standard because we want better and we want them to continuously challenge and use the driving feminist narrative. So we hold them to a higher standard for a reason, because they're our role models and we want them to help us subvert patriarchy. But at the same time, it's important to say a man would never face this kind of criticism for doing something like this. But there's also no equivalent in a patriarchal society.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, women are continually put under the microscope. So I want to put this to you. In 2025, where are we at with feminism? Are we moving forward or backwards?
Easy question. Thank you so much for asking.
Of course.
I'm so glad. I think that what is emerging right now is that in response to a volatile, venomous political landscape, a deeply difficult geopolitical time, we're often looking for scapegoats. And I think feminism right now is struggling to rail against Trump's America and the sort of geopolitical impact that that's had globally, right? And instead we're saying, I can attack Sabrina Carpenter's album cover because that feels like it's something within my sphere of influence and within my sphere of control to critique women about how they're purporting into or out of that narrative and that sort of landscape that we exist in. What is tough is that I obviously want better. I don't even want this to be the focal point. There are so many more important issues in the world that are happening right now. What's happening in LA, what's happening in Palestine. Like, it's really tough to even talk about this subject. I think with feminism, I can understand that this is not even an important discussion point, but also that inherently it's a lot of pop culture that drives our social narratives. And so I understand why feminists globally, including myself, have problems with these sorts of white women with power and privilege who meet the beauty standards using this to their advantage for marketing, right? But at the end of the day, I also think these are the important conversations that they're starting to create new discussions for the next wave of feminism and the next generation. I think it's important to acknowledge that I am also a white woman with a lot of privilege, and it's very easy for me to sort of throw out these lines, but it's not easy for me to actually talk about the intersectional feminist landscape because there are so many more important issues. And I think that's a really accurate criticism of these topics as well, is that they shouldn't be the focal point in 2025, but ultimately they still are. And we still do need to talk about them and critique whether they're satirical and what they're adding to the feminist discussion.
Hannah, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you for having me.
That was Hannah Ferguson, CEO of Cheek Media. Thanks for listening to this ep of The Briefing. While you're here, subscribing or following to The Briefing is the easiest way you can support us. And you can also follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. And we'll be back in your feed with another ep this afternoon. I'm Helen Smith. Catch you next time.
Listener.